Good morning again. Our next panel will be a fascinating panel moderated by Planetary Radio's Matt Kaplan once again about planetary protection. I've been really looking forward to this panel, particularly. Really important topic now that we're really considering going to the surface of Mars to make sure we don't contaminate the surface of Mars before we can check if there's actual indigenous life on Mars, but also to be able to protect ourselves in case there's backwards contamination. We don't want some sort of invasive microbial species to damage Earth as well. So there's been a lot of discussion on this topic over the last few weeks, and I know that NASA has begun a process to re-examine its current limitations for planetary protection to enable humans to actually go to the surface of Mars in the 2030s. So to present this panel, to moderate this panel, I give you Matt Kaplan of Planetary Radio.
Thanks for that great introduction to the segment, Chris. I am so proud to once again be part of the Humans to Mars Summit this year, and really very, very proud and happy.
Matt, your mic's low.
Part of this segment. I'm told my microphone is a little bit low.
Yeah, I can barely hear you.
Let's see if I can turn that up on this end. I think I have to open some other software here. Give me just a moment. Is that any better, Chris?
Nope.
Really? How about now?
That's perfect.
Okay.
I give you Matt Kaplan once again.
Yeah, the consummate broadcast pro, obviously. Chris, I'm going to start over. Thank you. That was a great introduction, opening for this, I agree, very important discussion. And I am thrilled. I'm very proud to be once again part of the Humans to Mars Summit, and very proud to be able to talk about this topic and another one that's coming up very soon after this segment today. Hope you'll be around for our discussion of how the International Space Station is helping us prepare to send humans back into deep space. Like most of you, I get a lot of newsletters, including updates from Wired magazine. And there is an item that caught me by surprise last week. It summarized the surprising results of the Tampopo astrobiology mission on the International Space Station. That was a Japanese effort. Several species of bacteria survived 3 years in space, not inside the warm, airy confines of the ISS, but exposed to hard vacuum and radiation. This reminded me of that famous quote from renowned planetary scientist and astrobiologist Jeff Goldblum, "Life finds a way." That, of course, is the fervent hope of all astrobiologists and the recurring nightmare for anyone who wants to protect our own and any other biospheres from contamination. Planetary protection has been in the news for other reasons in recent months. It promises to continue as a major concern. So we, Explore Mars, have brought together 3 outstanding leaders to talk about it and talk with you, because we will be taking your questions and comments later on in this roughly hour-long session. Let's get into those introductions. Up first is Lisa Pratt, biogeochemist and astrobiologist. Lisa Pratt became NASA's Planetary Protection Officer in 2018. Rumor has it that about 1,400 candidates applied for that job, maybe partly because it has the coolest title in the solar system. She leads NASA's Office of Planetary Protection. Lisa is also Provost Professor Emeritus of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences for Indiana University, Bloomington, where she has been a member of the faculty for over 30 years. So welcome, Lisa.
Hey, thank you very much. And Chris, Matt, wonderful introductions to a topic that for a long time seemed somewhat forgotten, and now it's really front and center. And I think with the launch of the Mars 2020 mission, Percy, we really are no longer talking about if sample return is going to happen. We're talking about when. And we'll be excited to watch that mission land in February and get started on the first leg of the integrated NASA-ESA return campaign. And if I could have the first slide, I'm just going to click through a few introductory materials. There it comes. We can go right past that one. That one just has my name. This is a reminder that I always like to start with, that our obligations to the international community and our responsibility to NASA as an agency derive from the Outer Space Treaty, We often point to two articles in particular, Article 6 and Article 9, as the two areas where we keep an eye on the original treaty language, and then we pay particular attention to the guidance that comes from COSPAR. The COSPAR is the designated official arm of COPUOS in the UN for dealing with planetary protection, as well as a number of other space exploration issues. Within the COSPAR organization, there is a panel on planetary protection that operates in both public sessions and executive sessions to formulate international guidelines. NASA as an agency participates in the COSPAR process, and currently Jim Green, the NASA chief scientist, is our representative to the panel, the COSPAR panel. And you'll notice there at the bottom, I have arrows going in both directions, because sometimes we are following COSPAR and sometimes COSPAR is following NASA in terms of responding to changing technical capabilities and scientific discoveries. Next slide. This is simply to remind you that, as Matt mentioned a minute ago, there's a great deal of change taking place at NASA, trying to make sure that we're synchronized with the changes occurring around us and that we're balancing our scientific exploration with all of the new stakeholders and players in space exploration. And up there in the upper right, you'll see the two new NASA interim directives known as NIDS, one for the moon and one for Mars. These documents have a 1-year lifespan, and both of those documents, now that they've been reviewed and officially approved and released by the agency, they will now be looked at in depth, not only by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, but any number of organizations that have scientific expertise on either the moon or Mars. And by the end of the lifetime of those two documents, next July, we will be in a position as an agency to either fully flesh out those documents as complete policy and implementation documents, or we will pull them back and take another look at them. So it's an ongoing process. Over there on the left side, you'll see that we have a new NPR that's currently completing its agency review. And below that, a first ever NASA standard for planetary protection. So again, lots of review and lots of change. Next slide. Of course, I think we're all aware, and we've had a little bit of an introduction just in the first few minutes to the excitement around the MSR, the Mars Sample Return Mission Architecture. And this is our first time since Apollo to really begin to wrap our arms around and come to grips with backward planetary protection. We have a lot of experience, particularly for Mars, with forward contamination and how we reduce the risk that we carry a hitchhiker with us and introduce it into a habitable Martian environment. But we have very little recent experience with backward planetary protection, and this will be the first time we bring a sample back from a planet that we consider to be habitable for Earth life, and therefore a planet that could harbor present day life as we know it on Earth. So lots of excitement around that campaign and understanding how we will handle that right-hand leg of this architecture once we launch samples from Mars, rendezvous with the European Return Orbiter, and then do the landing of the sample canister on Earth. And last panel, if we could bring that up. This is just more information than you want to see in a single panel. If this was an actual PowerPoint, I'd click through each of these boxes individually, but it's a snapshot of the Moon NID, which lays out two new NASA planetary protection categories termed 1-L for lunar and 2-L, again, the L representing lunar. These are not COSPAR categories, but they are being looked at by the Planetary Protection Panel, and they will either move in a similar direction or develop their own revision of the current categorization scheme. And with that, again, welcome, happy to be part of this wonderful group.
Another great introduction to this topic. Thank you very much, Lisa. And I hope that we can talk a little bit more about those so-called NIDs, the NIDs, later in the conversation. For now, though, let's go on to our second member of the panel today, someone that many of you have probably heard of because of his many activities in deep space exploration, mostly robotic exploration, but has a deep interest in human exploration as well. Planetary scientist Alan Stern is Associate VP for the Southwest Research Institute's Space Science and Engineering Division. He's a member of the National Science Board and, of course, is principal investigator for the triumphant New Horizons mission that is now speeding toward interstellar space. He served as chair of NASA's 2019 Planetary Protection Independent Review Board. Alan, welcome to H2M. And Alan, I think you might be muted.
Thanks, Matt.
There you go.
I guess we share audio problems this morning.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's great to be a part of this great panel. I think Lisa really did a great job of kicking it off and framing it. I'm going to speak without slides just for a minute or two, give a little bit of background. As Matt said, a little over a year ago, the administrator delegated the job of taking a thorough new look at planetary protection to Thomas Zurbuchen, the director, the associate administrator for science at the agency. And this Planetary Protection Independent Review Board was formed. I was asked to chair it. And we operated a group of about a dozen scientists and engineers and some folks from commercial spaceflight. We operated from late June until early October. Had several in-person meetings around the country and a large number of telecons. In addition, we met with dozens and dozens of experts and took a thorough look across the board at planetary protection and how it could be brought really up into the 21st century, because there hadn't been a thorough look at all the aspects of how planetary protection is mechanized and handled, the new technologies, the new players that are on board, that whole landscape. There hadn't been a look at that in decades, believe it or not. And we made about 80 findings and recommendations to the agency, reporting out last October. And then since then, we've gone and explained in detail to the NASA Advisory Council, to NASA advisory groups, to COSPAR, which was mentioned earlier, to ESA, to JAXA, to other agencies as well, what our findings and recommendations are. I want to say that maybe as a headliner, particularly for framing the conversation today, one of the things that we found is that Dr. Pratt, who we just heard from, and her Planetary Protection Organization have really made great strides forward in just the last few years already, even before the work of the PPIRB, to really move planetary protection forward into this new era with new players and new technologies, and to take a very pragmatic look at how we can do it better. And we complimented what Lisa and her team have been doing, and complimented the agency for this forward-looking approach that involved forming the PPIRB and the subsequent work that's taken place since then as well. As I said, we made a wide variety of findings and recommendations, and everything from how we should categorize different worlds and different terrains on those worlds, to the new technologies that should be involved, to new processes, and to how the new players, ranging from new countries participating in planetary exploration to private entities, can be brought into the fold, if you will, so that we do this as well as we possibly can. And then we also recommended that it not be very long, again, shouldn't be decades, but that NASA set up a process to reevaluate planetary protection from time to time, each decade, perhaps twice a decade, so that we don't get in a position where a lot of the thinking is actually from a previous generation. The development of spaceflight and the development of technologies, both for spaceflight and for doing biology, are just moving too fast for that. So with that introduction, Matt, I'll give it back to you and say how much I'm looking forward to this morning's panel.
Matt, I think you're muted.
Okay, my turn again. It's 2-1 now. Thank you, Alan. That was great. And there are several topics there that I hope we can pick up again later in the conversation. But I can see that we are already getting excellent questions from other participants in the summit this year. So with that in mind, I'm going to take us right to the last of our 3 panelists today. And that's Mike Gold, who is the Acting Associate Administrator in NASA's Office of International and Interagency Relations. He is also responsible for providing strategic direction to the Office of the General Counsel and supporting NASA's low Earth orbit commercialization efforts. Before joining NASA, Mike was the Vice President of Civil Space at Maxar Technologies. I first met him during his 13 years at Bigelow Aerospace. Mike, welcome, and I think you may have some slides to share with us as well.
Absolutely. And thank you, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity to address the Human Mars Summit. Thanks to everyone from Human Mars and Chris Carberry and the team for setting this up. And of course, my panelists, the fellow panelists. Lisa mentions that she's a professor. I learn from her every day, yet I don't have to pay tuition. So it's a great deal for me. And I'm going to be complimenting Alan in my presentation itself. But if we could bring those slides up, we'll go through them quickly. So next slide, please. I do just want to begin by setting some context that part of the reason, and look, Lisa and Al and I, we always thought that planetary protection is cool, but part of the reason that it's getting so much more attention now is because of the Artemis program and that we are moving forward to the moon. And by 2024, we'll have the first woman and the next man on the lunar surface. And this is where ISRU is going to become very important, that any successful exploration program really depends upon the ability to live off land, particularly if it's going to result in a permanent, sustainable presence, which is the goal of Artemis. So if we're going to have successful ISRU, planetary protection actually becomes very important to ensure that those resources can be utilized for everything from drinking water to fuel, etc. So I just want to provide that context and again point out ISRU because it's a piece of planetary protection that sometimes doesn't get all the attention that it should. Next slide, please. And I want to go back in history even before Alan got the request to run the PPIRB, the Planetary Protection Independent Review Board, and just note that this process began with the NASA Advisory Council's Regulatory and Policy Committee, that the need to update and have a multidisciplinary team take a look at these issues relative to planetary protection was a recommendation that came from the NAC Regulatory and Policy Committee, went up to the full NASA Advisory Committee, and then went to the administrator. And per what Alan said, he acted upon it. So I think the progress that we've made on this issue is a great example of how federal advisory committees can play an important role in discussing policy and in making progress on very important issues. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we come to the PPIRB. And let me tell you, not easy getting industry, scientists, academics together in a room to all agree on what needs to be done on an issue like planetary protection. And this is where Alan Stern just did a singular and exemplary job in herding all of those cats to come up with some extremely productive and helpful recommendations for the agency and eventually the world to implement. But I think we shouldn't take for granted that kind of success, that not only did you have a diversity in the kinds of organizations being represented from, again, scientific to industry to academia, but even among the industry participants, there are a wide variety of views from traditional established companies to new space entities. And again, kudos to Alan for working through all of these issues. And kudos to his team. We shouldn't take this for granted, that there was a lot of time spent by the Planetary Protection Independent Review Board on this topic. As Alan mentioned, there were meetings throughout the country, and no one's making money off of this. So I just want to say thank you to the members of the PPIRB, from academia, from the private sector, from the scientific community, who donated their time to support this incredibly important activity that I think had a terrific result. Next slide, please. And that result were the NIDS. And Lisa did a great job describing those. And again, she's forgotten more about this than I'll ever know. So let me just say that I think the NID did a terrific job relative to Mars in ensuring that we are going to take a balanced approach that takes account of absolutely science, but also sustainability and safety, human exploration, commercial activities. Just like it was challenging to take all of these views in the PPIRB, it will again be challenging to balance all of these views as we move forward, but absolutely necessary. And we'll need more cooperation in the public and private sector, science and academia, as we move forward to Mars, because really what the Mars NID was in the end was saying that we need to balance, we need to establish a process based on what we've learned in the past and move forward. And we'll be gaining a lot more information, having many more conversations in the future. And again, Lisa did a great job describing what we're doing on the moon. My one other comment relative to the moon, and if we could go to the next slide, please, is, you'll note in the moon NID that there was a reference to space heritage sites as we look at the Apollo landing sites. And I do just want to point out, because there's been discussion in this issue, that the reason that those human heritage sites, the space landing sites, appeared in the NID was due to science, that there are biologics potentially that would be worth studying, and that's why it was mentioned. Relative to preserving space history and space artifacts, that's more in the purview of what we're trying to accomplish with the Artemis Accords, where due to their historical importance, we want to preserve and protect historic landing sites, historic artifacts on the moon and other celestial bodies, whereas the NIDS mention these sites, but are doing so because of the potential importance to science. So I just wanted to clarify that. Also in the Artemis Accords, we won't specifically mention, or at least I don't believe when we have final text, that there will be explicit call-outs to the sections of the Outer Space Treaty that Lisa had mentioned. But I do want to emphasize that it's very important that the Artemis Accords are there to reinforce our commitment to all aspects of the Outer Space Treaty, including preventing harmful contamination. But rather than spill a lot of ink in the Artemis Accords on that topic, we've already got a great process with COSPAR to go through, and we thought our time and resources would be better spent dealing with the issue there, because there's a terrific existing framework. Next slide, please. And of course, I can't go through any presentation without making a science fiction reference. And when you look at sci-fi, there's often a lot of conflict. As a matter of fact, for those of you who saw the National Geographic Mars show, a lot of it is about the conflict between the private sector and the government and science versus commercial as we explore Mars. And that's why I'm so grateful and appreciative of all of the efforts that Lisa has done, that Alan has done, that the members of the PPIRB did to come together as a community, because we're going to do better when we work together. The more science that's done, the better our commercial activities will be. The more human exploration that's done, the more science we'll be able to do. The more commercial applications that are done, the more discoveries we will have, the more we will learn, fueling both science and exploration. So beware of false dichotomies. The question isn't science or human exploration or government or private sector. It's both. We need to all work together, and we will all enjoy the benefits. And that way, we can create a world that is much less like Star Wars and more like Star Trek. So with that, let me just say live long and prosper, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mike. LLAP to you as well. I think before we talk a little bit more about some of the topics that our panelists have brought up, one of them, Mike, you talked a lot about the difficulty of reaching consensus among all the different parties involved within the United States. And then, of course, there are our international both partners and competitors around the world. And we have a question that came in from Jeremiah Hennigan that directly addresses that. So I'll throw this to you, but Lisa, Alan, please feel free to jump in. How will the USA ensure and guarantee that our near-peer competitors, think China, he says, will adhere to the rules and regulations that the rest of the global community, or at least that we feel, are appropriate for protecting the solar system and ourselves?
Yeah. So before we get to the rest of the world, I think we always need to begin by getting our own house in order. And that's why, again, I appreciate the great work that Lisa and Alan and everyone in the PPIRB did to ensure that we're constantly updating our policies. We're never going to be done with that. We're always going to have new technologies. We're always going to have new programs and new possibilities. And that's why we have to treat these rules as ultimately organic, and we're always going to be learning and building new regulations. What I always fear is regulations dropping behind technology. So I appreciate everyone working on that, and I think we've done that successfully here in the US. Then when you go outside to organizations like the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space or to COSPAR, I think we've enjoyed a good relationship, and that US leadership has been welcome there. However, ultimately, in terms of people abiding by the rules and trying to preserve the environment, it's a question we get all the time in international law: is how do you enforce anything? And in the end, as we turn to the Outer Space Treaty, it comes down to consultation, that we can talk to each other and we can be transparent in terms of what we think needs to be done and what others are doing. And this is where there are concerns that we are very public relative to what is being done relative to planetary protection and the science that has gone into our determinations. And it would be terrific if China and every other nation would do so. That's not occurring now completely. Our hope is that all of those processes have been followed, but public presentations, public verification, transparency is so important. So all we can do in the end is lead by example. We will embrace our values of transparency, of protecting science, and hope that others will follow. But I'm very interested in Lisa's thoughts on the issue as well.
Lisa,
Mike,
we'll turn to you.
Mike, I really like what you just said, and I'll add one new piece of information to NASA ensuring that we're doing what we say others should do. Tomorrow, on Friday, we will have the first meeting of the new Committee on Planetary Protection, the COPP, at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. So that group will now serve as in an oversight and advisory role for the Office of Planetary Protection. And that's really important because that includes access to individuals who have expertise in medicine and across the health sector. And going forward, when we start to think about particularly what we're bringing back to Earth, this is way outside NASA's normal realm of expertise, and we need to involve that wider community. With regard to the international settings, I think Mike also got that just right. We have COSPAR, and COSPAR has been in place and has been a wonderful, safe haven for conversations across international boundaries that are often barriers to communication. And at the most recent public meeting of the Planetary Protection Panel, COSPAR's panel, that was held on the campus of the United Nations in Vienna, and I sat next to the delegation from China. So there are opportunities through our shared science values and goals to talk in ways that are in the interest of all nations, all of humanity. And I think the science platform provides that venue in a way that almost no other platform can.
Alan, did you want to get in on this discussion of the international aspects?
Well, I'll just say a couple of words because I think Lisa and Mike handled it very well. I will say that, first of all, we just heard this from Lisa, the Chinese are participating in post-bar, and I think that's very important. Unlike in some other domains, in the case of planetary protection and planetary exploration, we don't really have nation states that are rogue players. I think everybody's on board and has been on board for a long time, and although there are differences in implementation, I don't think that there are deep differences in intent. And that's a very good starting place to be at. And so we can work to improve, but we don't have really deep problems to try and solve. And so I'm an optimist on this. I think the world is going in the right direction with regard to both planetary exploration and the planetary protection aspects of that exploration. And so, as I said, I'm an optimist.
Lisa, I want to go back to those NIDs, the NASA interim directives, and particularly the second one there. And Mike talked about that maybe the key word is balance, that finding that balance, striking a balance between the need to explore and discover new science, including the search for life on Mars, of course, maybe primarily, and protecting that biosphere. And I just wonder in particular about what we will be able to do now that we have Perseverance on its way there. How is this new balance being struck as we look at Perseverance that will actually actively be looking for places that might have evidence of past, or dare we say current life on Mars, and eventually returning it?
Matt, I don't know where to start on that that sequence of questions and topics, but let me just say that we have a remarkable opportunity right now to use the moon as a proving ground before we go to Mars with humans. We almost couldn't design a better place to test technologies and to close knowledge gaps than at the moon with regard to the contamination that is inevitably carried by humans and their agriculture. So we've got perhaps 30 years, maybe a little bit less, depending on the activities in the commercial and private sector. But we can do things at the moon to understand how microbes and potentially even viruses or just biological agents like toxins and prions, how do they hold up if they get outside the comfort zone that is created by the habitat or the interior of a spacesuit or a roving vehicle. So we've got a little time, and that approach, the moon as a proving ground on the way to Mars, is now deeply embedded in the planning and architecture for the Artemis campaigns. Once we get past the robotic phase and we're ready to do human landing systems to the surface of the moon, it's very much a part of the agency, and I anticipate a great deal of funding now flowing into the research community, not just at NASA, but at National Science Foundation, maybe even over on the human health side, to really help us get better at understanding how the human microbiome and the health of our astronauts responds to low gravity environments like the moon or Mars, or responds to zero gravity environments such as in transportation, and then how we would detect and monitor any leakage or release of that of those microbes into the Martian environment. We can learn at the moon. It's a really important opportunity.
I'm so tempted to ask now, and I think I will, just for humor value. Mike Watkins, the Martian in The Martian, that great book and film, wouldn't he have been prosecuted when he got home for his gross contamination of the Martian surface?
I hope you're not asking me. Mike Gold's the lawyer. Mike Gold would be the prosecutor.
So I think you've just come up with the perfect sequel to The Martian. It's a space law movie, all about Article 6 in the Outer Space Treaty. It'll be a huge hit in the box office, I'm sure.
I have no doubt. I'll wait for the movie.
But hold on, if I can answer that question
Sure.
substantively, just briefly, because I think Lisa touched upon it, that the reason that he's not going to be thrown into outer space treaty jail is, I hope in that future time that we learn from our experience on the moon, develop policies and procedures that make sense, which is why by the time Matt Damon got to Mars, that he did not get prosecuted on the way back. And, we talked about uniting government and industry, uniting public and private sector, uniting human exploration and science, but also uniting the moon and Mars. That's so important, not just for planetary protection, but for the development of technology, for the entire exploration of architecture. We are very fortunate to have a moon to practice on to get to Mars. And it's through that experience that not only the substantive technology of Artemis will be developed and our substantive experience, but also the policies, the rules, even the business cases moving forward.
Lisa, I want to come back to also something else that you mentioned, backward contamination. And, I'm still somebody who is haunted by watching the Andromeda Strain, the film version of that book, 40, 50 years ago. In fact, you mentioned prions. They are specifically mentioned in the second NID as a possibility. What did we learn? What lessons were we taught by the experience of Apollo in making sure that we take very good care of any samples that are brought back to Earth? And as we've been asked by a couple of our participants today, should samples be brought back to the surface of Earth, or maybe they should end up on something like the ISS?
Well, that certainly is a debate that has played out repeatedly at NASA and in the wider scientific community. I think the majority of evidence points towards the safest activity being to keep the samples contained, 4 layers of containment, which is the current Mars sample return architecture, and to get those samples as quickly and safely as possible into an advanced receiving facility, a facility designed specifically for extraterrestrial materials. This is not the typical BSL-4 type of sample, although it will take a BSL-4 type of facility in terms of safety and security. But again, I absolutely concur with the current architecture, which is the only place we have the sophisticated tools, the containment systems, the air handling systems, and the power to do the analytical work to characterize those Martian materials for any evidence of a biological activity in the past or in the present is here on Earth. Every place else, we make do with minimal power. We make do with instruments and techniques that can be transported to someplace else. We need to do it here. We need to have those samples available to the broadest possible subject matter expertise. That's the international community. So I think we're doing the right thing. And let's face it, better to have the first samples returned from Mars, small, contained materials, because if we don't look first at robotic MSR, then the first samples we return from Mars will be astronauts. And that's just, I don't think that's a good idea.
Mike, Alan, anything to add?
I would like to add something. I'd like to add a little bit of planetary science perspective on this whole problem. And that is that we've known now for decades that the Earth and Mars exchange samples through natural processes, primarily impacts, large energetic impacts onto the surface of Mars that blow material not only off the surface, but into orbit around the sun. And then we find some of that material in the form of Martian meteorites on the Earth. That's completely uncontrolled by any planetary protection protocol. It's been going on for billions of years. And the Earth has been doing pretty well in response to that. Now, it doesn't replace the need for the work that the Planetary Protection Office under Lisa is doing, and the care that we want to take for Mars sample return, first robotic, and then with humans. but it does provide some important context because these kinds of sample exchanges have been taking place through natural processes, no controls on planetary protection. And as I said a few minutes ago, the Earth has been doing just fine.
Which makes me think of the possibility that we're all really Martians, but we won't get into panspermia in this session.
That being said, if Mars does violate any of our NIDs, as a lawyer, I will go after it. So
well, this guy will have something to say about that.
There you go. Yeah, we got so far without a Marvin the Martian reference. Can I just say one other point,
Sure.
too? Another debate that we've often heard in the space community is human space exploration versus robotics. And this is another example where it should be human space exploration and robotics. And it's appropriate I went after Lisa because all I'm doing is just echoing what she said, that it's so good that we're going to do a robotic mission before the human mission, because that informs the human mission. And here again, we see that it's not an either or, it's an and there's such tremendous synergy and importance between our robotic missions, what we're learning from that, to help inform and ensure the safety of our human spaceflight operations.
In fact, it's one of the basic tenets of science. We do science sequentially. Every experiment, every observation prepares us for a better experiment and to predict the next observation. And if we need to be sequential so that we don't have a misstep somewhere along the way. And I think that's exactly what the NASA ESA Mars Sample Return Campaign is all about. We're ready to do this. We have the technology, we have the capability. And as Alan very wisely pointed out, we've been swapping material with Mars for a long time. And if the sun's gravity has any influence on where things land, there's a lot more Martian material coming at us in this direction than there is Earth material being thrown back in the other way. And wouldn't it be great if we could find both Martian and Earth meteorites on the moon and have a look at how they record those original environments in a very cold, if they're in the cold spots on the moon, to see what those meteoritic materials look like if they're not landed on Earth, where Earth's contamination immediately overprints the extraterrestrial signature, because we're awash in organic matter on the Earth, and it's very hard to get a pristine meteorite sample so that we can really give it our best in-depth evaluation for evidence of extraterrestrial organic matter or extraterrestrial biology.
I'm glad you brought us back to the moon, Lisa. I want to go back to the first of those two NIDs, those NASA interim directives. The one that did talk about the moon, I read it and it sounded like, except for the poles, which need to be given greater consideration, greater protection because of those permanently shadowed areas where we know now there's water, and those historic sites that Mike talked about that are being protected in other ways as well. It sounded like the rest of the moon is more or less, I'm exaggerating a bit, fair game under these new directives.
That is the proposal that is out there now for the rest of the community to respond to, and that will be the very first ask NASA has for the new Committee on Planetary Protection. What is the current scientific consensus on the sensitivity of the moon as a whole, and in particular, the sensitivity of the permanently shadowed regions with regard to the activities that are created by both robotic and human missions to the moon? It's been discussed. The COSPAR and ESA have been surveying the lunar experts in Europe. The Academy will dig in deep and talk to the U.S. scientific community. COSPAR is the place where the international community can drive their opinions back into the system. And if the NID has it right, I think it strikes a balance. We've We've been to the moon. We've been down on the surface, both soft landed and crashed quite a number of times. We have a wonderful reservoir of lunar samples here at the Johnson Space Center that are curated and available for the whole world to seek materials for scientific research. So I think we know enough about the moon to let a wide range of activities occur over more than 95% of the surface. And then we lay out those two small areas that encircle both the PSRs and the areas where the neutron instruments show additional water outside the PSRs. We need to get in there very carefully. We need to know what's there. We need to know what kind of a record it might provide. If those are layered deposits that accumulate from the top, then we could have archives of billions of years of volatile addition to the Earth-Moon system. And we need to know before we, do crazy stuff there. But this is a step in that direction. It's a 1-year interim directive. An interim directive asks for input from the broader community.
So these currently expire in July of 2021, I think I saw. Alan, do you have any other comments about the first of these two NIDs?
I do. In fact, both those NIDs came directly out of findings and recommendations that the PPIRB made to NASA. And I think all of us on the independent review board were very happy to see the policy implementation in terms of these interim directives. And frankly, I look forward to this new panel that's just been constituted that Lisa spoke to, in taking a close look with new expertise and new eyes, and those interim directives evolving into a more permanent regime. Because one of the things that we felt very strongly about on PPIRB is that planetary protection should not be an impediment to the exploration and development of our solar system. That we should take more of a scalpel type approach than a bludgeon. And that where we can, the moon is a great example, we should relax planetary protection protocols. And so we took the approach that the moon is not just a point source, it's a very large body. We have sent dozens of missions there. We have literally a very wide variety of samples from a wide variety of places. And remember, they're not just from Apollo sites and Soviet robotic lander sample return missions, but lunar meteorites that come from literally hundreds of other places on the surface of the moon. And we know that the moon is both living in a sterilizing environment, and none of the samples that have come to the Earth naturally or by human return have shown any biological potential. So we said very specifically that we should protect those regions of high scientific interest, like the permanently shadowed regions. But the vast majority of the moon, as Lisa was describing, we can relax those concerns and help unleash this new era of 21st century exploration. And the agency, and for that matter, our international partners have been in agreement with that. I think it's an important step forward.
And I wanna really thank Alan and the IRB because they took some bold steps. And of course, the initial reaction of an agency when they constitute an independent review board that is truly independent in the way this one was, and pulled in representatives very clearly from the commercial and private stakeholders, you're a little, you get a little territorial. Don't tell us what we should be doing. But they did just that. And frankly, they created some momentum towards change. And then Mike Gold was a fresh voice inside the agency, and I think we're in a very good place. And if there's really a strong rebound in the other direction, we'll hear it. We haven't heard it yet, and trust me, we're listening. we're listening for a response, and we're looking forward to hearing what comes out of the next COSPAR activities, and then we'll see where we are.
This is all very encouraging for those of us who want to see exploration across the solar system moving ahead as expeditiously as possible. We only have a little bit more than 5 minutes left in this session. I want to get back to some of the questions that are coming in from some of the many people who have joined us today. And some of these we've touched on to a great deal. I want to get to one, though, from Tapaswini Sharma, who I believe is one of Janet Ivey's young proteges who's participating in the summit from India. Tapaswini says, what will be the material of the storage container that will carry the samples back to Earth? Why was it selected? And I think, Lisa, we'll go to you. Talk about those marvelous tubes that Perseverance is carrying to the Red Planet.
Yeah, there was tremendous effort put into thinking about material properties, both the material as its strength, its durability, as well as its minimal contamination of the science for the types of things we wish to learn from the sample. So it's a titanium material, and then it is coated, is passivated with a titanium oxide, and that's largely to control the temperature of the tubes. It's to create a light-colored exterior. But again, a lot of time and effort, and a number of working groups participated in discussions about what that material might be. And we are still in the process of working on the seals and materials for those additional layers of containment. So the tube is containment 1, the Oz, which the samples are placed into on the surface of Mars and then launched into Martian orbit. That's another material with a specific type of seal. And then there is, once the Oz is swallowed by the return orbiting vehicle, the European vehicle, there will be a high temperature brazed seal that will not only create some sterilization because of the high temperature, but it will create a very, very fine tortuous path that will act as a nanometer scale filter for anything getting in or out. And then there's an outer layer. So excellent question, but the material that will be intimately in contact with the samples has been treated at very high temperature to remove any organic contaminants, and it is a very inert material in terms of interaction with the samples. Even if the samples should contain a hydrated mineral, if there's any possibility for aqueous chemistry occurring outside the solid state in the sample tubes.
Here's a question from Lisa May. Very interesting. Takes us forward to when those samples have been returned. Can you comment on the allocation of return samples for hazard analysis versus science investigations? Do we have to prove samples are safe before we can address other science objectives? All of that should be in the future tense, of course. Lisa, you want to address that one?
Sure, I can jump in on that very quickly, although Mike might certainly have something to say about this. I think we all realize that backward planetary protection and the determination of the safety of the samples for release from a high containment, biologically secure facility is a process that has to be developed between now and when we get ready to go bring the samples back. So there's, NASA won't be the only agency that has an opinion about what happens with those samples once they're back here on Earth. I don't think we have an answer yet. I think lots of conversations, lots of interagency considerations have to take place, not to mention the fact that this is a joint NASA-ESA sample return campaign. So there will be players on the European side as well who will want to have a part in the decisions about how we investigate and who ultimately gives the checkered flag. They're safe to be studied outside BSL-4 level security and containment.
So I've only got 2 comments there. One is I sleep very well at night knowing that Lisa's there protecting our nation and our planet. So thank goodness. And thank you, Lisa. And second, we mentioned that MSR, Mars Sample Return, is a NASA ESA activity. And I think that's fantastic and so important because the processes that we develop are then inherently international. And the hope that even for the many nations that aren't directly participating is that we establish norms of behavior that are adopted by COSPAR and elsewhere to, again, protect the entire globe.
And as we've mentioned before, if we think decisions about the safety of robotically returned samples is complicated, scale that up by orders of magnitude for deciding whether or not a returning astronaut is safe for boots on the ground back at Earth.
We are just about out of time. Alan, I'm going to turn to you because I'm sure that you have lots of colleagues who cannot wait to get their hands, or at least their glove-boxed hands, on those samples when they make it back here to the laboratories available to us on Earth.
That's absolutely the case, and the sample return community is fortunately getting a chance to practice with the kind of samples that we've never had before, like those coming back from OSIRIS-REx, being collected a little bit later this year to come back to the Earth from a near-Earth asteroid. This is going to be so powerful for the field of planetary science to be able to apply all the modern analytical techniques to do the chemistry, the isotopic chemistry, the age dating, to understand the mineralogy of Mars, and add a set of documented samples from known places along a rover traverse is going to just propel the field of planetary science forward by light years, to use a metaphor. And remember, everything we're talking about is about first sample return from Mars, and from the moon and from asteroids, and eventually from places like Ceres and hopefully Venus and Mercury and many other locales across the solar system. We're going to be bringing samples back to advance our knowledge. And this is just the beginning. And it's so exciting to see it underway and to see it handled so responsibly from a planetary protection standpoint. That's what excites me.
Mike, with just a few seconds left, any closing thoughts?
Just that, Alan, as I think what Lisa and I are saying is that the robotics come first. So thank you for setting us up for that human mission to Pluto. We're looking forward to that.
Well, I'll settle for an orbiter. How's that, Alan? Lisa, we'll give you the last word.
No, just an absolute pleasure to be here with Mike and Alan and Matt, to have you moderating. It's an extraordinary period of time right now. We are stepping away, and we are transforming the future of humans.
Well said, all of you. Thank you so much for being part of this planetary protection session as we begin the last day of the Humans to Mars Summit this year in this new virtual format. I hope to see all of you in person next year once we've all been vaccinated. Our guests have been Lisa Pratt, Alan Stern, and Mike Gold. And I will be back with you in about 20 minutes when we will talk about how the ISS is or should be used to help us make it safe and healthy and productive for humans to head for the red planet. Now I believe we have a video to show you that'll take up a few minutes here before we get to that ISS discussion. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.